Welcome to Overwatch, and this time I want to introduce everyone to something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is competitive Overwatch. Now you might be saying, oh, what the hell? Because competitive Overwatch, how could that exist? The closed beta was really limited and surely people couldn't be competing. Yes, they were. So what Blizzard did was they invited a ton of really competitive people to the game. And what happened was, well, they wanted to compete and people wanted to watch, so hey, a scene sort of started to build up from there. Now, if you haven't had a chance to watch any tournaments, some of these things might sound a little bit strange to you, but trust me, stick with me. I want to introduce you basically to some of the hot button topics in competitive Overwatch, a couple of the teams you might want to look out for, depending on whether you're from North America or Europe, and then from there, you know, where you can watch, why you should be interested. And I'll actually start with where you can watch, because I myself will be casting a bunch of tournaments in the coming month of June, and basically what I will be doing is casting an American tournament. It's the ONOG, the Video Game Voters Network tournament, brought to you by ONOG, and I'll be casting every weekend for the coming 3 weekends. So that's the 11th and 12th, and then the weekends after that. So you can figure it out from there and find out about what I'm doing there. But what is competitive Overwatch? Why should you care about competitive Overwatch? First and foremost, as we lose the first point on Hanamura incredibly quickly because we have a very shatterable defense, basically. You should care because it's a sign of basically the game played to its maximum level. It's a very interesting, there's a lot of strategy in it, which is part of why I like it, for example, and I see a lot of that. There's also just a lot of very skillful players. It's very entertaining to watch when you understand the game, and it can give you a very deep understanding of the game when you start considering, you know, why is a team running this hero compared to this hero? Why is a team running that hero compared to that hero? It's also good for giving you insight into terms of how to, I don't know, compare yourself to where you're at compared to the pros. Because, for example, some matchups go completely different ways on pro-level teams than they do in pub games. So, for example, Widowmaker and Pharah is an incredibly interesting matchup in pro games, and pressure on Widowmakers is actually a huge factor in pro games, and how they deal with Widowmakers is one of those things that can really inform and educate your gameplay. So I love using it for that. I love using it also as well as a way of thinking about hero picks, and there's some hero picks that, you know, will come out in specific places on maps where they might be really strong, and you can definitely learn from that and take from that. But there are a couple of big issues in pro Overwatch at the moment. One of the biggest ones, one of the most hotly debated and hotly contested, is the idea of a hero limit. So the reason why a hero limit is such a big deal is because in pro Overwatch for the longest time, basically every single time there's been a meta has formed, it's always been off the back of basically having no hero limit. And what that means is the teams basically run comps that are very specific to one style of play and maximize something that's a little bit overpowered perhaps, or a little bit too simple, or just, you know, very easy to make work, and then drive that as hard as they can with one hero limit. So a good example is, for a long time there was what's called the double orb comp, where you ran 2 Zenyatas and you ran 2 Genjis. You put the orbs on both Genjis and then just left the Zenyatas a mile back. This was back when Zenyatta didn't need to maintain line of sight on the Genjis, and then the Genjis would just go work with each other and kill, because dealing with 2 Genjis is infinitely harder than dealing with 1. The same applies with Tracer, by the way. Trying to fight 2 Tracers actually creates a lot more problems than just trying to fight a single Tracer. She's basically, you know, the double Tracer has more value than just 2 single Tracers, if that makes sense, in terms of how irritating they are. Personally, I'm a big fan of one hero limit in competitive Overwatch. In pub Overwatch, it doesn't matter so much, and there's a lot of ways around it. I've seen teams that, for example, aren't very skilled try and run these sort of competitive lineups and really struggle and basically just get completely blocked out by it because they don't know how to approach it and don't know how to make it work. Another thing that one hero limit prevents is stuff like the double Tracer, double Winston, double Lucio combo, which is primarily run on King of the Hill, and basically what it allows you to do is constantly force the timer into overtime until you get a big sweep, and then one team will eventually win. But it's not very fun to watch, and it's not very fun to play as well, so the pros complain about that a lot. And what you end up having is a match that is just decided basically by, well, whoever tires out first. And it's not really what you want out of competitive Overwatch. You want teams sort of making interesting decisions and making interesting uses of the various heroes in their toolkit. And that's one thing that one hero limit is really trying to force as well, is it's forcing you to use as many heroes as possible to try and achieve things that you need to make happen. So, for example, one complaint I hear is that in one hero limit it's very difficult to take high ground. And what that means is, you know, normally with that one hero limit, you'd do something like you just run 2 Winstons and then jump both Winstons on top of the enemy team and then fight from there, basically. You'd use them to sort of establish a beachhead and then fight off the back of that. Without one hero limit, you can't do that. So you need more options to sort of get that vertical movement going. And one option, for example, that Tavik likes to run, one of the best players in Europe, is he brought Hanzo out. And he started using it to sort of get into interesting places, use it very positionally, used it very cleverly, And I loved seeing it, and it was really interesting to see what a pro-level Hanzo can do. Someone who's clearly practiced Hanzo, someone who knew what they were doing with it, someone positioning in an intelligent way, and suddenly you could see the potential of this hero explode in such a cool fashion. Now, of course, the other big hot button issue is basically how to play competitive Overwatch. So, for example, the way that most tournaments are played is using Stopwatch. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar, Stopwatch basically says that, you know, this is for payload maps, by the way, and control point maps, but I'll get onto control point maps in a little while. So, what happens with Stopwatch map mode is that the team that basically pushes the fastest wins. So, let's say Team A and Team B are playing each other, both teams push all the way to the end of a map. One team will win based on which team pushed faster. What it also causes is if you say push to the first checkpoint on a map, and then the enemy team fails to beat it, they have to push all the way to the end then to be able to sort of win out. So it's a matter of sort of can you beat the enemy team's time, and it makes speed matter. It's just a very good way of sort of dividing up, is a team good or bad, because it gives you a lot of opportunities to sort of win out. It gives you many ways of doing it. Some people complain that it basically ascribes another win condition to the game, which is speed. So one reason why the double orb comp, for example, is very favoured is because it's extremely fast. And if you're a good team at playing that comp, you're forcing the other team to basically play the same comp to match your speed. It's a really interesting, but to me, like, that adds another layer of strategy, right? It determines how you make your pick. So, for example, Zarya is very good at getting you safely to the end of the map on a payload map, because she can just use the same ultimate over and over again. You get a Tobalstein up, and then you basically use all your abilities, and you just kill the enemy team off, and then you push off the back of that. But the thing with Zarya is she's a little bit slow. So suddenly you're making a trade-off. Do you have the safe and slow pick, or do you have the faster pick that's going to enable you to sort of get to the end of the map that might be a little more risky, right? And there's definitely some places as well where Zarya just isn't that strong, or there's other picks that might be better. And so you have decision-making involved. There's a layer of strategy, there's shot calling involved. This is why I'm excited about competitive Overwatch, and this is sort of why I always more towards sort of the analytical side of competitive Overwatch, is because I like thinking about, why have they picked this hero in this place? Why are they making this decision? What's informed that choice? And there is a lot of that going on under the surface, and especially with one hero limit, it lets those sort of choices really shine, rather than just, say, picking whatever's strong at the moment, which is generally either 2 McCrees or Widowmaker or whatever, or double Winston. And then any issues with those heroes is infinitely magnified when you have 2 of those heroes, basically, especially Winston, for example, who has very stable DPS, but is a massive problem with one hero limit, with no hero limit, sorry.
Feels a bit open.
Now, there are arguments for sort of formats other than Stopwatch. So one format, for example, that occasionally sees use is basically a points-based system that sort of uses Stopwatch incorporated into it. And what that system basically relies on is, the idea is if you push all the way to the end of the map, you get a point. And then if the enemy team pushes all the way to the end of their map, they get a point. Whatever team pushes the fastest also gets a point. And you basically play out a best of 3, but you accumulate the points over the entire thing. It's a little bit complicated, but once you start using it, it does start working, and it does start making sense. And it basically rewards you for completing maps, for winning maps, because then you can get point advantages that way. And here I get beaten to death by Alicia, because Hanzo is kind of a terrible one-on-one duelist. You can win fights, but when they're that close, it's just a massive crapshoot of whether you're going to hit them or not. Like, if he jukes, then maybe I would have shot him. If he doesn't juke, then maybe I won't. I really don't like Hanzo in 1 vs 1s, but when you start setting him up in flanks, he's just absolutely ace. I mean, I've done 10,000 damage at this stage. It's actually doing pretty well here, and it's only going to go up from there. The other big issue right now in competitive is maps. So you'll very frequently see teams request that 2 control point maps are basically removed from map pools. So what happens is teams do a map pick and ban, and when you don't remove those maps from the pools, you basically end up with a situation where teams that might be weaker are trying to force teams to those 2 control point maps. And so what happens is, you know, the weaker team can perhaps steal a win because those maps are less competitively rigorous, they're much easier to complete, and so it's much easier for a weaker team to beat a stronger team on that kind of map. So that's why 2 control points aren't favoured at all. It's also why King of the Hill is always a little bit dubious as well, because King of the Hill, again, isn't quite as considered as, I don't know, reliable, I suppose, as the payload for determining what team is better than the other, and that's what you really want out of the competitive scene, right? But yeah, as this map wraps up, this has sort of been my introduction to competitive and why I like it and why you should be interested, and also a couple of the issues. I will sort of go into depth on a couple of these issues, by the way, especially one hero limit. I am becoming a very big advocate of one hero limit in competitive, not necessarily in even any ranked matchmaking that they implement unless it's at the very highest level, at the very top of the ladder. Then you start enforcing rules similar to competitive. But for normal play, I don't think one hero limit is that big a deal, but for competitive it absolutely is. It helps with the watchability, helps with sort of teams making interesting decisions and choices, and that's why I'm a big fan of that. But I'm sure you guys are going to have a million opinions on that in the comments. By the way, if you want some interesting teams to watch, Cloud9 are definitely the strongest team in the world right now, but I recommend Luminosity Gaming as well, just for excellent personalities. And my personal favourite team is Reunited. They're a European team that have been around for a long time. They are basically the old Fnatic lineup, and plus one British player, which his name is Cruz, who's a player that actually was featured on the channel very, very early in the channel as a player known as Boo Boo Magus in a scrim that I cast ages ago. But yeah, that was me introducing competitive Overwatch. Hopefully that was interesting to you guys. Hopefully you guys go check it out. Go check me out casting as well with the Onog Invitational. Hope to see you there. Toodle.
Perfect start for everything.